Hello there, welcome to the weekly Outside Views report on the politics of Africa and Arabia. At the request of China and the United Arab Emirates, the United Nations Security Council on Thursday dealt with the controversial visit of the right-wing extremist Israeli Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Israel's UN ambassador Gilad Erdan called it really absurd to hold a meeting because of a non-event. He was really shocked and spoke of a short and completely legitimate visit by the right-wing extremist Israeli security minister. The Palestinian envoy to the UN, Riyad Mansour, however, accused Israel of acting with absolute contempt towards the Palestinians, the Council and the international community. He urged Security Council members to take action against Israel. What red line does Israel have to cross for the Security Council to finally say enough is enough and act accordingly, Mansour asked. With his visit on Tuesday to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, which is holy to Jews and Muslims alike, Ben-Gvir fueled fears of a renewed escalation of violence between Israelis and Palestinians. The visit sparked international criticism, including from the German federal government and the United States. Judaism reveres the Temple Mount as its holiest site. For Muslims, the hill with the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque is the third holiest site after Mecca and Medina. The Temple Mount is under Muslim administration. To avoid provocation, non-Muslim visitors are allowed to visit at certain times, but not to pray there. At the conclusion of the 2-hour session of the UN Security Council, Palestinian UN envoy Mansour expressed his satisfaction with the Security Council's unanimity in wanting to maintain the status quo. However, he stated that he did not expect the UN to take concrete action against Israel. At least 18 people were killed in 2 attacks on local government buildings in the central Somali province of Hiran on Wednesday morning, according to the authorities. According to reports, the assassins used cars filled with explosives. Accordingly, the 2 suicide bombers, 5 civilians and 11 security forces died. The Islamist terrorist militia Al-Shabaab claimed responsibility for the attack via its propaganda radio Andalus. The country on the Horn of Africa, with around 16 million inhabitants, has been rocked by attacks and other acts of violence for years. For several months, the government in Mogadishu has been waging a military offensive against the Al-Shabaab militia, which controls large areas in central Somalia. A day after being pardoned by the junta in Mali, 46 soldiers from Ivory Coast returned home over the weekend. The Ivorian Air Force plane that took them back to their country landed at Abidjan airport just before midnight on Saturday, and that's what journalists from the AFP news agency reported. Ivorian President Alassane Ouattara announced that he would re-establish normal relations with Mali. The plane with the soldiers took off from the Malian capital of Bamako on Saturday afternoon. During a brief stopover in West African Togo, its president Faure Gnassingbé officially handed the soldiers over to Ivorian Defense Minister Tene Birama Ouattara. Gnassingbé played a key role in the release, and both the Malian and the Ivorian authorities credited his mediation. After their arrival in the Ivorian metropolis of Abidjan, the soldiers in military uniforms got out of the plane one by one, each waving a small Ivorian flag. They were greeted by President Alassane Ouattara before entering the presidential pavilion at the airport, where their families were waiting for them. Now that this crisis is behind us, we can resume normal relations with the brother country Mali, which needs us, and we need it too, is what Ouattara said in his welcoming speech. A spokesman for the soldiers thanked the head of state and the Ivorian people for their support. "We are happy and relieved to be back in the motherland," he said. In July, Mali arrested a total of 49 soldiers from Ivory Coast after their arrival at Bamako airport. According to the Ivorian government, they should support the UN peacekeeping mission MINUSMA as security guards, which the Malian authorities were also aware of. However, Mali classified the soldiers as mercenaries, which the Ivory Coast categorically denied. The arrest of the soldiers triggered a diplomatic dispute between the two countries. At the end of December, 46 of them were sentenced to 20 years in prison in Mali. 3 female soldiers who were able to return to Ivory Coast in September were sentenced to death in absentia. The Ivorians were found guilty of assassination and conspiracy against the government and attempting to undermine state security. That's what prosecutors said at the time. But finally, on Friday, Malian junta chief Assimi Goïta pardoned all 49 military personnel from Ivory Coast. After the arrest of the Ivorians, Mali's military junta temporarily suspended the rotation of MINUSMA soldiers, which also affected the German armed forces. The UN peacekeeping force stationed in Mali since 2013 is intended to protect the civilian population. The deployment in the West African crisis country is currently the most dangerous foreign deployment of the German Bundeswehr. In November, the federal government announced that it would phase out the mission by May 2024. In Yemen, the war between the internationally recognized government and the Houthi rebels threatens to flare up again. In the 8-year conflict, the rebel group has received support from Iran and government forces from the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. By early 2022, the rebels were on the verge of victory. However, government troops were still able to push them back. Then the food and fuel shortages resulting from the Ukraine war led to a stalemate, which, mediated by the UN, made possible a ceasefire in April. In October, however, negotiations to extend the ceasefire failed. Tensions have increased again since then. Although there have been no major fights so far, both sides are already making preparations for an escalation, as experts report. The situation could develop in different directions. A new offensive by the Houthis seems just as conceivable as an agreement with Saudi Arabia and the government. The experts advise a new mediation attempt by the United Nations. The possibility of an inner Yemeni agreement with all groups is needed so that peace can last in the long term. However, that option seems the least likely, not least because Iran, as an ally of the Houthi rebels, is in no mood to help, as the experts say. The war in and around the Tigray River in Ethiopia was one of the deadliest in the past year. Between 385,000 and 600,000 civilians are said to have died as a result of the fighting and its aftermath. The government around Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and the so-called Tigray People's Liberation Front, or TPLF, are facing each other. A deal was struck between the parties in November, and the conflict has been on hold ever since. I reported on this channel earlier. Soldiers from neighboring Eritrea who had been fighting alongside Ethiopian government forces also reportedly withdrew last week, and that's a good sign for peace. But experts warn that a lot can still go wrong. As long as the weapons are not laid down, there could be another escalation at any time. Prime Minister Abiy would also have to approach the Tigrayans for the peace process, but it seems questionable whether he can convince his allied counterpart from Eritrea. The government leader there, Isaias Afewerki, sees the TPLF as arch-enemies. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, experts warn of a proxy war. The rebel group M23 already controls several towns in the border area and is responsible for destruction and displacement. The M23 were pushed back by UN forces in 2013 but are now back, and according to experts, both due to tensions between states in the region and as a result of domestic conflicts between the Congolese government and various rebel groups. I also talked about this on this channel before. Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi also enlisted support from Uganda and Burundi, which in turn exacerbated tensions with Rwanda. Allegations are now coming from the Congo that Rwanda is supporting the M23, also in order to gain access to Congolese mineral resources. This claim is widely supported by UN experts. The Rwandan government, in turn, accuses the Congolese army of collaborating with a Rwandan rebel group. This is also fundamentally confirmed by the United Nations. In 2023, there will also be elections in the Congo. A tightening of the rhetoric in the election campaign could hold new potential for escalation. International troops, including those from the United Nations, are already present in Congo. The last time there were talks between the M23 rebels and the Congolese and East African armed forces, that was in December. A week later, the M23 gave up a key position near the Rwandan border. An agreement with Rwanda would be central to peace. If this fails, there's a risk of a conflagration in East Africa due to the many countries involved, according to the experts. And experts warn that Islamist tendencies are still on the rise in Burkina Faso, in Mali and Niger. In the north of Mali, the government has de facto largely lost control. Militias with ties to Al-Qaeda and ISIS are fighting each other, as are some non-Islamist rebel groups. In central Mali, on the other hand, militias, government troops and the Russian Wagner mercenaries are facing each other, and the situation seems to be deadlocked. France has ended its mission in the country, and Germany, as I mentioned earlier in this video, also wants to withdraw the Bundeswehr in the long term. This also wobbles the UN mission. Islamist groups control 40% of Burkina Faso. Thousands of people were killed on their advance, and around 2 million people had to flee. The government, weakened by coups, is having trouble rallying its security forces behind it. The current ruler is looking for volunteers to fight the jihadists, as experts report, and there is a risk of bloodshed between different ethnic groups. And Niger is also a concern for the experts. Although the government there has Islamist groups better under control, militias from neighboring countries have invaded the country. A failed coup in 2021 and the subsequent arrests within the military could also have fueled resentment against the government in the army, it is feared. However, French troops are still present there, and an EU mission is due to start at the beginning of this year. And you see there's a lot going on again this week, but this concludes this week's report on Africa and Arabia. And I hope to see you tomorrow. My next video will be there, and I'll be back.